There we go. Recording is in progress, and hopefully we are making progress. Starting with Parshat Vayeshev. Yaakov Avinu enters into a different phase of his life at this time. This is the story that he has survived, living 20 years with his father-in-law, Lavan, out of Israel. His return to Israel and his encounter with his brother Esav, uncertain as it was, his surviving that encounter, his encountering some sort of angel, having his name changed from Yaakov to Yisrael. And now he returns home and he settles outside of the city of Shechem. And that's what we had encountered last week. We read about the story involving the rape of his daughter, the capture, the abduction, the rape of his daughter Dinah, and the tragedy that brought about upon the family, the subsequent slaughter of all the males in the city by two of Yaakov's sons, who, by the way, are Shimon and Levi. I don't know if anybody knows, it's an interesting point, and this totally side point. But in the Torah's description of that encounter between Shimon and Levi and how they entered the city of Shechem following the circumcision, the consent of all the males in the city to circumcise in order to marry into the Yaakov family. So Shimon and Levi enter. And it's interesting that Shimon and Levi are there described as everybody, Ish et Charbo, every one of the two of them is described as an Ish. Ish is a man. But according to the genealogical calculations that Rashi and other Meforshim and Chazal do, they determined that at the time of that encounter, Shimon and Levi were 13 years old. So I know that in our modern perception, 13-year-old is a little boy, but it is possible that in the ancient world of the Torah, 13 years old was not such a little kid. We created sociologically social stratuses that may not have been true. We created this notion of adolescence in our society. There never was such a thing as adolescence. There was a child, and then the child ended up doing work that you and I would associate normally to adult labor. But in an earlier form of society, children that we call children were not treated the way that we treat children. So it is possible that at the time of that whole encounter, Shimon and Levi could have physically been more developed, plus had been treated as more adult-like than childlike. Anyways, the point of what I'm saying is that the calculation of Chazal is that they were 13 years old, and the Torah calls them by the name Ish. And this becomes one of the sources. How do you know that becoming a bar mitzvah is associated with 13 years old? Because Shimon and Levi were 13. The Torah calls them an Ish, as it were a man, and that becomes, as it were, a source that at what point does a child transition from being a child to quote-unquote a man of legal majority status. And one of the sources is from the story of the Torah calling Shimon and Levi an Ish. But be that as it may, the Torah now transitions to another phase of Yaakov's life. And this is the story of Yosef. And the Torah begins by telling us a little bit about the family, as you know, but more specifically about the son called Yosef. So I want to start reading. I'm reading from Perek Lamed Zion 37. Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz migurei aviv be'eretz Canaan. Yaakov settled in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. Elliott toldot Yaakov. Yosef ben Shvasrei shana haya ro'eh echav batzon v'hu na'ar b'nei Bilha v'b'nei Zilpah nashei aviv. These are the chronicles of Yaakov. Okay, so the very next word in Torah's description of the chronicles of Yaakov is Yosef, indicating that in some ways Yosef became the chronicle of Yaakov. Not that the other sons played no role. Of course they did. They become ultimately the sons that constitute the Jewish nation. But for this story, somehow Yosef occupies a place that has perhaps a disproportionate influence on the life of the entire family and, truthfully, the life of the entire Jewish people, because it's through the story of Yosef, the Jewish people, or Yaakov's family, which later becomes the Jewish people, make their way from Eretz Canaan to Eretz Mitzrayim. So these are the chronicles of Yaakov. Yosef, at the age of 17 years, was a shepherd with his brothers by the flock, but he was a youth with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. Okay. And Yosef would bring evil reports to them, to their father. So we have a character sketch being developed here by the Torah. He's 17 years old, but he's a Na'ar. So how interesting is that? I just started this year by telling you that Shimon and Levi were 13 years old when they engaged in military combat that had devastating effect. And here you have a story of Yosef, who's 17 years old, so he's 4 years older than they were that story, and he's behaving in a manner that the Torah describes as being a Na'ar, not an Ish. He's acting in a way which is clearly perceived as being immature, being provocative, not mature, not thought through, very different, very different. So he's presented as somehow a less emotionally developed individual. Israel ahavet Yosef mikol banav ki ben zikunim hu lo v'asa lo ketonet hasim. So the Torah tells us now Israel loved Yosef more than all of his sons since he was a child of his old age, and he made him a fine woolen tunic. Old age, here he was a child of his old age, ki ben zikunim hu lo. Ben, son, zikunim, from the word zaken is old age. Now, who's being referred to is obviously Yosef. But Yosef was not really the Ben Zikunim. The Ben Zikunim, the child of Yaakov's old age, should have been Binyamin, because he was the youngest. So looking at the list of 12, Binyamin really was the one born when Yaakov was more old. Yosef was born clearly not when he was a young man. That's true. He was born to Rachel. But nonetheless, he's not the son born of Yaakov's oldest age. And so that's why it sort of pushes the Meforshim, the traditional biblical commentaries, to say, well, there's got to be something more than that, because it's not accurate to say that he's born of his old age. So Rashi says Ben Zikunim isn't necessarily a description of Yosef in relation to Yaakov's age, but the word Zaken, especially in biblical Hebrew and more so even rabbinic Hebrew, is an elder. And an elder is not only a statement of a person's age, but it's a statement of a person's wisdom. So Rashi tells us, when we're looking at understanding what does it mean, Ben Zikunim, it also, he quotes Onkelos, the great Aramaic translation, Bar Chakim Hu Le, Kol Ma Shelamad Mishen Ve'ever Masar Lo. And so Rashi says, Ben Zikunim doesn't mean born in his old age, means the son to whom he transferred all of his knowledge, or as Rashi says, the specific knowledge that Yaakov gathered when he was studying for 14 years at the yeshiva of Shem Ve'eber. We've had occasion in the past to talk about what did that mean. Why does Yaakov have to go to the yeshiva of somebody else and not learn by his father or grandfather? But be that as it may, we're not going to go back to that now. The word Ben Zikunim doesn't literally have to mean something like the age. I mean, this is the child that Yaakov somehow invested more effort. And maybe that was because he had some sort of divine premonition that he, Yosef, needs something different, something unusual that the other children perhaps don't require. Was it because he saw him as being more immature and he knew it, and therefore he felt he needed to sort of be guiding him more directly in an involved way? Possibly. Did he have a sense that something special is going to unfold with this child and he needs to invest something else in it? For those of you on the call who are blessed to be parents, I think we love each child equally in the depth of our love, but sometimes we do things for each child that's different than the other child, that we know our children are different, and we try to provide each child that which he or she needs, not in terms of love, but in terms of that which we give them. It's not clear exactly what that means. And he gave him a ketonet pasim. So one would argue, well, that was not a correct or politically correct move, because certainly it's going to engender some strong emotional response. So I want you to listen here. I'm leading up to, try to listen to the way the Torah describes the reaction of the brothers to what's going on. So the Torah tells us, so the brothers quickly, they were insightful, and the brothers saw that it was he, Yosef, whom their father loved most of all, from all the other brothers. They saw that. There was something that they detected. It wasn't too hard to see that. And so what was their reaction? They hated him. And they couldn't speak to him peacefully. Some of the Forshim say, at least they were honest. They weren't deceptive, meaning what? They told him exactly how they felt. We can't speak with you peacefully. We can't communicate with you. We don't like you. And they were open. In a more biting comment, some might say, well, they weren't Canadian then. Meaning, they actually said how they felt, whereas sometimes Canadians are a little bit more careful about the way we speak, where everybody's smiling and behind your back. No, right up front, sort of like Israelis. And they were Israeli. Yeah, they tell you exactly how they feel. So that's a positive. They may not have loved him, liked him, but they let him know exactly. That's one possible interpretation. So then Yosef has these extraordinary dreams. Yosef he has this dream, and he's happy, quick to tell his brothers, almost not thinking, not even aware of how they're going to react. And when they do that by Yasifu Odsinaoto. They hate him even more. He says, I want you to pay attention. Listen, guys, I want to tell you a dream that I had last night. So here's the first dream. So he says, we're binding sheaves in the middle of the field when, wow, look at this. My sheep arose and also remained standing. And then, behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. The brothers hear this and they say, and so they ask him, they turn to him, so would you reign over us? What is this? What are you trying to tell us? You're trying that you have dreams of grandeur, your royalty, and we're what? We're slaves, we're going to be your servants. Would you dominate us? And they hated him even more because of his dreams and because of his talk. So he has another dream. And I guess he still doesn't figure out what discretion is. And he tells this dream to his brothers. I had a dream. I had a dream of what? It's the sun and the moon and 11 stars, and they're all bowing down to me. So he tells his brothers, he tells his father. And his father scolded him, and he said to him, what's this dream that you have dreamt? Are we to come, I and your mother and your brothers, to bow down to you to the ground? Now listen to this part. So the brothers are jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Hope you picked that up. The first dream did engender a response. What was the response? You recall? They hated him. The second dream, Torah says, uses a different verb. It also elicited a response. What was the response? They were jealous. So again, the traditional rabbinic lens is very careful. We read every word, we weigh every word that we read. So it's pretty obvious that one of the things that you're going to be hearing is, so why in the first case were they hated him, but in the second case, which is the second dream, they were jealous of him. So what's the difference between the jealousy and the hate? So Yosef Dov Halevi, the first Soloveitchik, in other words, Rav Soloveitchik, the late Rav Soloveitchik, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva University, his great-grandfather, the father of Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, was the first Rav Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveitchik. And he wrote a commentary to the Torah called Beis Halevi. And in his commentary, he points out that the Torah makes a distinction. And he makes an interesting case here, I think, as to what's the difference between hating in this case, and the jealousy that was elicited from the second dream. And so he says the following. He says the first case, as you remember, is about the sheaves. So sheaves of wheat bowing down. So that's more like a dream, and the symbols in the dream revolve around the physical world, revolve around food, parnasa, revolve around mizonot and household maintenance. And the brothers who are hearing this dream and understanding that Yosef somehow has these visions of grandeur, but the grandeur that he's envisioning as the understanding, they try to interpret his dream, is visions of wealth, visions of the things that are social status items. And yes, that was grating on them, and it made them hate him. But it wasn't somehow about them. That he was richer than they were, that he was wealthy and they weren't. That bothered them, but it didn't grate on them. It didn't affect them in a certain way. And so the way in which the Torah chooses to describe the reaction is hatred, vayisnu'u oto. But the second dream was different. Sun, moon, stars. What's different? What's different about it? What are those symbols of? If wheat and sheaves are symbols of the physical world, sun and moon and stars are symbols of the metaphysical world, the spiritual world. And so here, Yosef would be implying something very different. Whereas the first dream and its symbols seem to suggest a difference between Yosef and the brothers, which is not specific to who they were. It's specific to the externalities, the wealth. When you talk about the other symbols, the sun, the moon, and the stars, which are symbols of metaphysical reality or spirituality, then you're not talking about externalities. Then you're talking about that which resides within. You're talking about the spiritual. You're talking about the essence of a person. And from the second dream, the brothers felt, they interpreted Yosef's dream. It's not about external. He is making the claim that he actually is not the same as us, that we're not all brothers, as it were, that are equal in some sense. He's making the claim that he is, in fact, better at the deepest, most spiritual level, at the soul level. He is better than us. And then as it were, in the qualities of ruchniyut, he and service to God, some of that which revolves in the upper world, he is closer to the center and we are farther from it. We bow down to him. He dominates over us. And therefore, says Rav Yosef of Levi Soloveitchik, the Beis Halevi, they weren't upset so much. They hated the first thing, but not the way the second. The second thing just made them feel a different feeling. They made him feel, it made them feel that he felt superior. They could have dealt with the first thing, but not with the second. So that's how the Beis Halevi chooses to understand the difference between the language. But having said that, let's take a look at one of the key stories of the Parsha. And in some ways, it's a really difficult story to understand. It's the story of Yaakov sending Yosef to check on the brothers. So it's not so clear, because let's just read part of it, and then we're going to stop and try to understand it. What's going on? I want to read this part. Vayelchu, I'm reading now chapter Parak Lamed Zayin Pasuk Yudeh. Vayelchu echav lirot et son avihem b'Shechem. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock in Shechem. Keep that in mind for 1 second. Vayomer Yisrael Yosef halo achecha ruim b'Shechem. Yisrael says to Yosef, your brothers, and by the way, notice it doesn't say Yaakov, it says Yisrael. Your brothers are shepherding in Shechem. L'cha ve'eshalchacha alehem. Go, and I'm going to send you to them. Vayomer lo hinei. And he says, I am here. I'm ready to go. I am ready to go. Okay, I had a little difficulty with my screen. I'm sorry. Vayomer lo lechna re'ei et shlom achecha v'et shlom hatzon v'ashiveni davar v'ishlacheu mi'im Hebron v'yevu Shechema. So Yaakov, or Yisrael, says to Yosef, go now, look into the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring me back word. So he sent him from the depth of Hebron, and he arrived at Shechem. So let's talk a little bit about this. Do you think Yaakov knew what was going on in his family? Do you think he was not aware of the family strife? Do you think he didn't know that his sons did not like Yosef so much? Was it all a secret? Did he really not know? So if he did know, then why did he send Yosef? Wasn't he sending him danger? And even more fascinating than that, where are the brothers shepherding? Torah tells us, Shechem. Shechem? Of all the places to take your flock, you go to Shechem. Now, why is that a surprise? Well, in my introductory comments to the Parshat, what happened in Shechem? Shechem is the place where two of Yaakov's sons, 13-year-old Shimon and Levi, went in on the third day following the mass circumcision of all the males, and he killed them all. They murdered them all. They took advantage of their physical infirmity. They couldn't fight. And Shimon and Levi wiped out the entire population of Shechem that was male and captured all the children and females and took all, like, oh my gosh. Of all the places to go, you're going to go to Shechem. It's like rubbing it in their faces, almost as though you're inviting some sort of response. It's not adding up. It's not adding up as to, one, why does he send Yosef? And two, what are they doing in Shechem? Could there be some other sort of reason? Could there be some other message that's not so clear at the surface? So I'm going to share with you some interesting explanations here, which hopefully you'll find as interesting as I do. So some of the Meforshim, as I said, are a little bit surprised that Yaakov is sending Yosef to go to this. And for Yosef, for agreeing to go. I mean, again, they tell him, we said, the Torah says, Lo yachul ledaber l'shalom. They're telling him, Yosef, we hate you. We can't stand being with you. Don't come here. Don't be with us. Go play. We don't want you. So Yosef knows this. And so when his father says, Yosef, I want you to go, he agrees. You could say, of course, that's to his credit, because he's doing the mitzvah of kibbutz avim. He's listening to his father, knowing full well that the mitzvah is going to entail a certain, maybe even a large degree of challenge and emotional difficulty, because he may be expecting his brothers to give him a very hard time. So Sforno explains the mission. Sforno tries to understand this, as many of the Meforshim do. So Sforno says, when Yaakov was telling him, Yosef, to go and see what's going on, Sforno says, go and see with your intelligence and set all that is wrong and make it right. So Sforno says that Yaakov was deliberately sending Yosef on a mission, not just to find out how the brothers are and to see, is everybody feeling okay, but try to make peace. Go and try to make peace. Because if you're going to have a family that works together, we have to figure out how we can treat each other with respect. So go. So this was not a mistake. it was a calculated, maybe even risk. According to the Rashbam and Sforno, Yosef had a high regard for the mitzvah of Kibbut Av V'Aim, and therefore he went. And remember what the story says? He went, and he wasn't exactly sure where they were. I don't think I read this out loud. I want to read this. Ish. So Yosef goes, and a man discovers him. And Yosef is sort of lost in the field. He's blundering. He doesn't know where to go. And the man says to him, what do you seek? Like, what's going on? How can I help you? I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me, please, where they are shepherding? And the man, who Chazal interpret or identify not as a man, but actually as an angel, he says, well, they traveled from here. They're not here anymore. But I did hear them say, let us go to Dotan. So the Torah tells us, so Yosef moves from there, and he actually goes to Dotan, where he was told that they were shepherding. And he found them there. It's entirely, halachically, possible for Yosef not to have gone to Dotan. He went to Shem, they weren't there. He could have gone home and said legitimately, honestly, with a full, complete, open heart, Abba, I went, and they weren't there. And halachically, I don't think anybody would have felt that Yosef was sort of squirming out of this and not doing it. He honored his father in a halachically correct way. And he would have fulfilled what Yaakov or Yisrael had asked him to do. Now, one of the other Meforshim, Rashbam, we've talked about him before, Rashi's grandsons, in his interpretation of this section, says something fascinating, which perhaps explains what's going on here with the location of Shem. Rashbam, quoting the name of another Chacham, says that the mission was precisely to see how the brothers were doing in Shem, because that's where Shimon and Levi had massacred the residents in the wake, of course, the abduction and the rape of Dinah. So Yaakov, the father, feared for his son's well-being, and since they had gone back to the place of danger from where they had fled. So Yaakov was checking up on it. Makes perfect sense. He was worried, maybe Shem actually happens to be the best place for the flock. And remember that Yaakov is a fabulously wealthy man. And in that time, wealth was measured in many ways, but certainly one of the ways, which was the size of the flock. And he had a huge, huge herd. So maybe that's where it made sense for them to go. But once Yosef had heard that his brothers had moved on, his mission was complete. But he, Yosef, took his father's command one step further and continued to look for his brothers until he found them in Dotan. So, according to these explanations, Yosef seems to be a guy definitely concerned about doing his father's command and doing it in a manner that is halachically appropriate. Now, Rav Asher ben Yechiel, who was one of the Tosafists, otherwise known as the Rosh, Rav Asher ben Yechiel, is more explicit. And he says something fascinating. He says that Yaakov knew, he understood, he had a sense that the mission could and might end tragically. But he was more concerned that the brothers be oblivious to the dangers lurking in Shechem. Now, don't forget, who were the brothers? Well, we have a whole list, but amongst them were Shimon and Levi. Maybe Shimon and Levi are feeling, we're not scared. We know what we did last time, so we're confident. Yaakov, who, in fact, as you may remember, was furious, and never, ever till the day he died, actually forgave Shimon and Levi. He's a little bit more dubious. He may be a little bit more cautious. He may be a little bit more even realistic. So when he finds out, when he knows that they're going to Shechem, he's actually concerned that there's a good chance that things may not end well. So in the Rosh's opinion, the danger threatening the brothers in Shechem was more concrete and certain than the risk of harm to Yosef. So Yaakov got it. He understood that there was a risk to Yosef, but he also understood there was really a risk to the brothers. And in weighing which risk was more realistic, which risk could, God forbid, produce the worst or greater evil result, Yaakov decided the brothers were in greater danger than Yosef was in. And so therefore Yaakov took the risk of sending Yosef off to his brothers so that by the very act of coming to them, they would somehow, Yosef is coming here, they would be roused, the Rosh says, to examine their situation and leave that place of pasture for a more secure place. Maybe they somehow fell into a false sense of security. Yosef would be coming. Maybe he would be telling him, Abba asked me to come. He was a little bit worried about everybody in Shechem. Oh, Shechem. And then they would make that sort of the calculation move. Interesting idea. So it was a calculated move on Yaakov's part, and he's not being a naive father. He knows exactly what's going on multiple levels. Now, there's another group of commentaries who are also writing about this, and they say that this whole thing, of course, was a divine decree. So rather than seeing this as a sort of a narrative that plays out through Yaakov's decision-making concerns about the welfare, the safety, the security of his children, these Chachamim, these Parshanim see this as a divine plan, a meta plan. It's not about Yaakov's decision-making and strategizing. This is about a divine plan. And of course, the divine plan has to do with an agreement that Hashem made with Avraham in Brit Bein Vitarim, way back in chapter Tetvav, chapter 15, where Hashem tells Abraham, and your children are going to end up going down to Eretz Mitzrayim. Hashem knows this. And this is the first stage where this plan is being concretized. And so Yosef going to Shechem is a necessary part, as it were, for the fulfillment of a divine prophecy that was mentioned earlier. So, according to Rav Avraham, the son of the Rambam. Some of you know, of course, the Rambam is famous, but he also had a Talmid Chacham son called Rav Avraham. And Rabbi Avraham makes a fascinating comment, and he says that, in his opinion, Hashem blocked Yaakov's premonitions and hid from him the results of the action in order to begin the process of the descent to Egypt, meaning that Yaakov might have had a sense of this is not a good thing, but that sense of anxiety was blocked by Hashem. Why? Why? Because the story had to unfold with Yosef going down to Mitzrayim, being the precursor to the entire Jewish people going down to Mitzrayim. Yaakov, these are the translated words of Rav Avraham, the son of the Rambam. Yaakov was not cognizant of this divine secret, and he threw caution to the wind in letting Yosef go off by himself to his brothers, whose hearts were filled with hatred. This happened in order to carry out his will that they, Yaakov and his sons, descend to Egypt. Interesting. So this is really Hashem playing out his hand, as it were, and in some ways manipulating Yaakov's own perception to make sure that the story developed this way. Here's another possibility, which is very interesting. This is from a Chacham whose name I'm not familiar with, but in doing a little preparation for tonight's Shiur, I came across his name. His name is Rabbi Yitzchak Ibn Arroyo. And Rabbi Yitzchak Ibn Arroyo, in a book of drashot that he wrote called Tanchumot Kel, explains Yosef's motives in going to meet his brothers. Yosef's motives. So Yosef went there. Why? To achieve reconciliation. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak Ibn Arroyo derives this idea that Yosef went to accomplish reconciliation from Yosef's answers to this man, by Yitzeu Ish, that he's lost. Yosef is lost, and a man finds him. And he says to this man, I'll read it one more time, He says, what are you seeking? And Yosef answers, Et achai anochi mevakesh. I am seeking my brothers. I am looking for my brothers. So Arroyo holds this answer to have been, he believes that that answer is not really required. He doesn't have, Yosef didn't have to say that. He didn't have to express himself that way, since from the point of view of the Ish, of the asker, trying to help Yosef wandering in the fields, it was immaterial what relation pertained between him and for those he was looking. Meaning, Yosef says, I'm looking for my brothers. Why did you have to say, I'm looking for some people? He's revealing something about himself that from the narrative itself, from that specific situation, is a detail which seems to be unnecessary. So why is Yosef expressing that? So on one hand, you could say, here it is again, he's a 17-year-old boy, and he's just spouting out, he's not careful with his words. But Rabbi Yitzchak Ibn Arroyo thinks not true, that Yosef actually has a purpose in mind. And he's revealing his purpose by saying, I'm looking for my brothers, which in some ways is a metaphor for what? I'm looking for not my brothers, I'm looking for brotherhood. I'm looking for that. I'm looking for that wholeness of our family. So Yosef should have given a more precise description of whom he sought. For the fact that they were his brothers is not written on their faces. Nobody knows who these people are. There's a group of guys and about 2,000 sheep. Who would care? We're Yosef's brothers, but he's mentioning that. So according to Arroyo, the man was, as the Chachamim say, of course, was an angel. So Yosef is saying a lot more than he was looking for them. He was looking for brotherhood. I seek my brothers, in a sense, I seek brotherhood. And listen to his words. I'll read from a translation of, I found a translation of Tanchumot Kale, the drasha that he says. The angel asked Yosef what he was seeking. He answered him, his brothers, since the angel had asked him what he was seeking in order that his brothers might know that he was beloved of heaven, and that if they mistreat him, then the Holy One, blessed be he, would exact from them the price of having insulted him. This we know from the word lamor, which means that he was to tell his brothers that an angel had asked him, what are you looking for? He responded, I'm looking for my brothers, meaning I seek brotherhood and unity, for he was going to them in order to allay their fury and to appease them. So it's an interesting perspective that Yosef went with a purpose in mind, not just to listen out of kibbud av to his dad, but he knew that he had somehow created a situation of a fracture in the family. So let's just go a little bit further, because I hope you find it interesting. I am. So the man or the angel, whichever one, answers Yosef, well, they have gone from here. So what does that mean, they've gone from here? Well, on one level, it means they've moved, but more, deeper. He intimated to him that the brothers were far, far from any sense of brotherhood and unity as far as Shechem from Dotan. It wasn't just the statement of, they're geographically, 3 miles west, 2 miles north, whatever it is, or kilometer. No, the angel is saying to Yosef, if you're seeking brotherhood, you should know that they really moved on, and that's not something that they're seeking. And this idea, in fact, seems to be developed by 2 other meforshim from the holy city of Tzfat. And in their opinion, Shechem, the city, symbolized brotherhood and unity, presumably because the brothers had acted there in concert. So it's interesting, the word Shechem, which is the city, the Arabic is called Nablus, but Shechem, of course, is a city that Yaakov had bought in last week's Parshat. And Shechem is also a word that connotes brotherhood. And so it's interesting that the brothers are they went to the city of Shechem, the city of brotherhood. And Yaakov may have understood, these Meforshim say, that because the brothers went to Shechem, maybe there is a change of heart, that they're going to a place that represents how the brothers somehow came together and connected with each other and somehow understood their desire for unity. And so therefore Yaakov had sent Yosef to see how the brothers were faring, hoping to bring about reconciliation between them. And Yosef too, he went there. Why? With the intentions of making peace with his brothers and acknowledging the fact that they are older than he was, and they were more mature than he was, and therefore he owes them respect. But when he got there, his brothers weren't in that place, were they? Physically, geographically, and clearly not spiritually and emotionally. And they had moved on to a place called Dotan, an allusion to another viewpoint, antithetical to brotherhood and unity. So the story has a lot of these sort of messages laden in it, in the names. But one of the questions, of course, that we as the readers are interested to know is, did Yaakov really not know what was going on? So the Meforshim that we just had a chance to see suggest, no, they did understand. Certainly some of them suggest they did understand. It was a strategic decision. It was a well thought out decision. Either it was well thought out to the point that there was danger, but Yaakov felt that the danger to the brothers might have been greater than the danger to Yosef, or it was in the hope that something had happened, that there may have been some indication of a change, that the family might be prepared for reconciliation. That's a tough call, isn't it? I say a lot. I speak a lot all the time about how this is not a story about other people. It's often a story about us. Families are complicated, aren't they? We all have come from a family. All of us were children of somebody. And I don't know everybody's story. I don't know most of your stories. But I do know from reading and talking and seeing and feeling that families are complicated organisms. And sometimes, how should I say this? They work better, and sometimes they need a lot of effort, a lot of work. Here's a story of a family that acts in a broken manner, a very broken manner. And it's not just any family. It's our family. It's Yaakov Avinu. And if it's Yaakov Avinu, our father, then we're part of the family. And we're watching this happen. And in our hearts are saying, "Oi," in Yiddish, stitvai, it hurts to watch this happen. And we watch it happen then, and I dare say we even watch it happen now, to our neighbors, to ourselves, to our families. It's not simple. Okay, I wanna go on a little bit more. Yaakov, according to the Torah, loved Yosef more than his other sons. And his other sons sensed this. At one point, Reuven, I didn't read the whole story. I'm sure by this point we all know that the brothers see Yosef coming, and they plot to harm him. They plot to hurt him. So the first question that all of us ask would be, well, that makes our forefathers, our ancestors, conspirators to murder. They didn't, but they would have had there not been some person to stop them. So why should we venerate the brothers who, in their hearts, were quite prepared to kill Yosef? Reuven stepped in, and it was Reuven who suggested they throw him in the pit. And then it was Yehuda who suggested they take him out of the pit and sell him to the caravan of Ishmaelites or Midianim, who were making their way through the trade routes all the way to Egypt. So at the end of the story, at one point in the story, we have to scratch our heads and say, this is not bringing great cover to our family. We're not feeling really sort of encouraged that we come from family where the brothers hate each other so much that not only do they hate each other, not only are they envious of each other, not only do they not talk to each other nicely, but they're even trying to figure out how to kill each other, or at least some of them. So that's a real complicated question, and many have dealt with that. So one of the people who dealt with it is Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. He was the late Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva Torah V'dat in New York. And in his collected commentaries to the Torah called Emet LeYaakov, he offers in a short essay, not very long, he tries to deal with this question. And he offers an interesting, I think, perspective. And the perspective is this. Is what the brothers sought to do to Yosef in any way justifiable? So we read the story with, I guess, a certain lens, but Rabbi Kamenetsky urges us to read it not just at the emotional lens and not just through the sort of the literary lens, but read it also through the halachic lens. What's the halachic lens? So the halachic lens takes a look not just at the words in the Chumash, but also at the Torah Sheba'al Peh and the oral Torah, the explanations. And in that world of explanations, Yosef does not come off as being squeaky clean. I describe him so far as being sure, and maybe, shoots off his mouth. He's not thinking, but he's not a little boy. He's 17. He may be 17, and which, of course, is older than 13, which means that he's now in the category of being responsible for his actions. And being immature is not an excuse. It's not. So what did he do? So according to the Torah, which we read at the beginning, he's bringing evil reports to Yaakov. Bringing evil reports. So what's the point of that? What's the point of bringing an evil report? The point of bringing an evil report, technically, is to get somebody in quote-unquote trouble. It happens in school all the time as the little kids, but Yosef's not a little kid. And neither are his older brothers. They're not little kids. They're older, some of them, and wiser. And he is bringing all sorts of accusations against him that, should Yaakov have chosen to apply whatever level of Jewish law would have existed, would have gotten them in halachic trouble. And the brothers said, "What are you doing?" Now, we don't know if what Yosef is saying is true or not. But from the brothers' point of view, what you're doing is you're seeking to bring harm to us. So within Jewish law, if somebody is seeking to harm you, what should you do? Sit there, for sure, right? Just sit there and let that person bring harm right to you, right to your doorstep. Doesn't matter. Of course not. Why? There's no obligation for you to sit passively by and wait for someone to come and harm you. Now, if it's a perfect stranger, of course you're going to get up and you're going to do something to stop them. The most dramatic articulation of this notion of you're not required to sit and wait passively as someone brings trouble to your doorstep, the most dramatic articulation of that is the following words: Haba l'hargecha, hashkem v'hargo. If somebody is coming to kill you, what should you do? You should preempt them and kill them first. You do not have an obligation to let yourself be killed. You have an obligation to preserve your life. But I'm taking somebody else's life. Yes, that's correct, because your life is also worth saving. And you do not have an obligation to let your life be snuffed out because somebody else wishes to harm you. Your life is not less important than that person's life. So the brothers, according to Rabbi Kamenetsky, are going through this exercise. And they're saying, he's relentless. Yosef is relentless. He's just not stopping. We're telling him to stop. We're telling him we don't like it. We're telling him over and over and over again, stop doing what you're doing. You're trying to harm us. Stop it. And Yosef's not listening. And at one point, some of the brothers, maybe all of the brothers said, well, we've been taught by our father, Yaakov, that we're not obligated to sit and let someone bring harm to us. So if he's not going to stop, it is appropriate for us to stop him. And so the brothers attempt to stop Yosef by the most dramatic means, in fact, says Rabbi Kamenetsky, can be halakhically justified. different sort of take on the story. We all see the story as something evil on the part of the brothers. But Rabbi Yaakov says, and he introduces this by, he says, Sha'alani Talmid Echad, one of my own students, says Rabbi Yaakov, he's the Rosh Yeshiva in the yeshiva. Somebody asked me, how are we supposed to relate to the stories that the Torah itself tells us about Yosef's brothers? Isn't this Lashon Hara? So every time I'm giving the Shiur, every time we're sitting and reading Parshat Vayeshev, we're letting the Balkori publicly declare the brothers to have done these terrible things. Well, that's called Lashon Hara in any other circumstance. I wouldn't let you get up and say in the Shiur, oh, I want to tell you something that somebody did. Lashon Hara, I would shut it down. You would shut it down because that's not acceptable. So how is it that we're allowing ourselves to listen to this story year in, year out about these people who ultimately then we venerate as being the progenitors of the Jewish people? So Kamenetsky says because they're not evil. Because in fact, they had a halachic justification for their response to their relentless brother who sought to put them in harm's way. He sought to bring news that could ultimately have been understood and acted upon in a way which would be hurtful to them. Not that they were trying to responsibility for any wrongdoing, but who says what they were doing was wrong? Yosef? He was wiser than they were. He understood the nuances. Maybe not. And so, according to Rabbi Kamenetsky, that's one of the responses that was going on here. But let's just consider another part of the story. Oh, there's so many parts to this. Parshat Vayeshev is it's a extraordinary story. So the brothers see him coming and they all decide, I'm going to read this part, let's kill him. Let's kill him. We'll kill him. We'll throw him in one of the pits here. And we're going to go home and we'll say to Abba, you know what, a wild animal ate him, which is not uncommon. This is Israel at this time, and there were bears and lions. There were wild animals, 100%. And then let's see what's going to come of his dreams. Oh, okay. Vishma Reuven is sitting there, and he decides to save Yosef. No, we are not going to kill him. We are not going to actively take his life. That's not happening. What are we going to do? He says to them, please, let's not spill his blood. Let's not be the active cause of his death. We're not going to murder him. Let's throw him into this pit, obviously pointing to a pit in the area that they were in. But lay not a hand on him. And Torah tells us as a side point, not part of what Reuven is saying, so Reuven's plan was to save him, meaning throw him in a pit, and then apparently when nobody's looking, when the brothers go away and can't see him, he was going to pull him out of the pit and he was going to take him back home. So skip a little bit. So they do just what he says. They take him, they take off his ketonot vasim, they throw him into the pit, and the famous 5 words, babor reik in bumai. The bore is empty, and it has no water in it. The obvious question, well, if you say something is empty, and obviously it has nothing in it. So if you say it's empty, you don't have to explain further by saying it has no water. Empty means empty. So again, with the traditional rabbinic lens, if you say it's empty, you don't have to say it has no water. But if the Torah is already saying ein bo mayim, that is an indication that there must be some other message that the Torah wants us to know. Empty would have been sufficient. So Rashi, quoting the Chachamim, our Chachamim say, yes, it's true, there was no water. However, mayim ein bo, there was no water in it. That's true. That detail is significant. There was no water, so it wasn't going to drown. But nechashim va'akruvim yishbo, but it did have poisonous snakes and scorpions in it. So let's not make a mistake of thinking that it was empty. It was empty of water, but it wasn't empty of other sources of danger to life. So that's an interesting situation. So Reuven's thought was, I'm going to save his life. I have an idea. Let's throw him in the pit. The Torah tells us the pit, however, had poisonous snakes and scorpions in it. So did Reuven know that? Was Reuven making a calculation? Oh my gosh, if I don't do something, we may actually end up killing him with our hands. Let's take a risk. I think it's a calculated risk, similar to what Yaakov may have thought sending Yosef to the brothers. Throw him in the pit. Maybe he has a better chance of survival. Who knows what will happen? But if I don't throw him in the pit, then maybe he will for surely die. I want to share with you an interesting take on this little piece of Torah here by Rav Chaim of Volozhin. Rav Chaim of Volozhin has an interesting interpretation on what possible lesson emerges from this little very short section. One that may surprise you. So the pit that Reuven threw Yosef in was more than just dangerous. So the halacha actually says that if you see a man in a pit where there are snakes and scorpions, then you can testify that the man is dead. That's how certain death is. And on the basis of this testimony, if somebody were to say, I saw that Shlomi was in a pit that had snakes and scorpions, on the basis of that testimony, the man's wife would be allowed to remarry. That's a big law, meaning a married woman cannot marry another man. That is the prohibition, the biblical prohibition of adultery. But if the man was seen to be in a pit with poisonous snakes and scorpions, the assumption is so powerful that he could not survive that the halacha allows his wife to remarry because he for sure couldn't make it, and she's for sure a widow, and she doesn't have to remain a widow forever. Wow. Okay. So this gives us a picture of the gravity of Yosef's situation. Like, it's not as though, oh, wow, we really dodged a bullet on this one. We didn't dodge anything. He's as good as dead in this pit. And so, but shortly thereafter, Yehuda has another idea. He pulls Yosef out of the pit and sells him to merchants passing by. And of course, we know the end of the story. The merchants take him down to Egypt, and where he ultimately reaches certain heights of fame and fortune, and we know the rest of the story. It's Sefer Shemot. So it would seem that Reuven's idea was a murderous one, while Yehuda's was the one that saved him. Putting him in the pit would have killed him. That was Reuven's idea. Yehuda says, let's pull him out of the pit. We don't know what's going to happen. There's a chance he'll be, may not end up having a fabulous life, but he could end up being alive still. So the Torah praises Reuven for his worthy intention to save Yosef from his hands. But the Gemara Masechet Sanhedrin, Daf Vav, says something really even interesting. It says this about Yehuda's decision. Whoever blesses Yehuda blasphemes. What? Whoever blesses Yehuda for doing what he did, pulling him out of sending him to Egypt, that's considered blasphemy. Reuven is worthy of praise. Yehuda, blasphemy. Isn't it reversed? What Reuven did almost certainly put Yosef's life in risk. What Yehuda did for sure saved his life. That's the fact. So why is it that what Yehuda did is worthy of such just criticism? You're a blasphemer if you're thanking Yehuda. And Reuven is getting a big yeshkoyach, a pat on the back, and we're making a kiddush in his name this coming Shabbos. What? So Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin explains the paradox. Interesting explanation. And he says this, listen to this. A man is safer in a pit filled with scorpions and snakes in the land of Israel than in the opulent palaces of a foreign land. Safer in apparent physical danger in Eretz Yisrael than in circumstances which appear physically secure in Chutz La'aretz. Whoa, that's an unexpected twist, at least for me. That for Reuven, to put Yosef in a pit with scorpions and snakes and somehow is safer than what Yehuda did to Yosef. So that's an interesting take. Now, I know it's a little bit late. Just let me close with this. I want to share how there may be one way of unraveling this paradoxical comment. So many people, what do you look at? How deep do you look at it at a situation and circumstance? Surface or below the surface? Rav Chaim clearly, Chaim of Volozhin, is looking way, way below the surface of this, way below. So we may be ready to concede that one's spiritual well-being is the function of factors not perceived by the naked eye. And we may be prepared to admit that today, at least, a person's spirit is safer in Eretz Yisrael than outside of it. Wow. There's physical life and there's spiritual life. And where will which one prosper? The suggestion is that there are circumstances in which we sometimes convince ourselves that we're safer where we are than we really are. Maybe we're not as safe as we think. And the fact that Chazal somehow felt it okay and even proper to commend Reuven and criticize Yehuda, says Reb Chaim of Volozhin, may be one of the ways that the Chachamim are urging us to take a step back and to genuinely, honestly, fairly assess the lives that we lead and to recognize the potential dangers that exists for us as Jews living as we do, where we do. And not that there aren't dangers, chas v'shalom, to say that there aren't dangers in Israel. There are. But there are also dangers outside of Israel. And maybe that's one of the messages that the Chachamim were trying to convey in this paradoxical statement about which strategy potentially was the more worthy one. Reuven's strategy or Yehuda's strategy. An interesting take. And I invite everybody to unmute themselves and to speak a little bit of what you think. And then I also wanted to do our homework assignment, which was, as you may remember, what's the connection between the word malach, which is angel, mem, lamed, aleph, chaf, and malacha, the work that we do, and the work that is forbidden to be done on Shabbat, malacha, mem, lamed, aleph, chaf, with the hey at the end. Okay, so we have a couple of minutes here. Hopefully we can I'm trying to change this.
Oh, so thought-provoking.
I hope everybody can see me. Can you hear? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to hear some of your thoughts about anything we did discuss. If anybody has any thoughts about the connection between malach and malacha, happy to do that as we listen to your thoughts as well.
Rabbi, it's Kenny. I had a lot of thoughts actually, but not exactly on what you spoke about. But
okay.
I saw a parallel when some people say anti-Semitism, that the root is that we're the chosen people, and I always found that a little weak. But if you parallel it to the Parsha, that Joseph was chosen, and that Jacob somehow knew what he was bringing on to his child, then you could say God somehow knew, what we would have to go through to be the chosen people.
Interesting idea, Ken. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that. Do you think because we are the chosen people, that is the cause of anti-Semitism?
That's what some people say. I find it just not strong enough. Like, I think there's other matters at play, but certainly it can be derived from this parsha that yes.
Interesting. Fascinating. Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to share a thought, a comment, a question, a feeling, an answer? Malach and Malacha. Andy, please.
Well, Yaakov bought land near Shechem,
Yeah.
and he doesn't live there.
Right.
It's the only place, that and the cave of Machpelah, the only places we know that we actually own at this point.
David Melech also bought the Harabite. He also bought.
But
David
that's
bought
later.
also.
That's later.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
So Yaakov left there presumably because it was tainted by what his kids did. And
Or
he
it was
wanted-
dangerous for him.
Yeah. But he sent the boys there to, didn't he send them to Shem to graze the sheep?
Well, if you look at the language at the beginning of the Parsha, it says that Yaakov turns to Yosef and he says, wait a minute, here it is. Re'eh et shlom achicha v'shlom atzon. No, vayelchu echad lirot et atzon avihem b'Shechem. They went to pasture their father's field in Shechem. It doesn't say that Yaakov sent them to Shechem. It says that they went to Shechem. It could be that it was, their mistake, maybe their hubris, maybe their arrogance in wanting to go there. Yaakov was aware that there was danger there, but it doesn't say he was the one who sent them there.
Mm-hmm. It just seems that that's like a key to this whole.
Yeah.
If they had stayed nearby, it's a long way. It's a long way to take your sheep to get some grass. If they had just stayed nearby, then nothing like this would have happened.
Possibly, but then again, Jewish destiny wouldn't unfold it as apparently it needed to.
Yeah, exactly.
So it may very well have been a error in their judgment, which ended up being a key step
Yeah.
the way in which
Yeah.
our history unfolded.
Yeah.
So Yaakov sensed that there was danger, according to some of the portion that I brought to you tonight.
Yeah.
That's why he sent Yosef.
Rabbi, I remember in the story of the Moroccan, when the Moroccan go to into the land, doesn't Caleb make a special trip to Shem? Somewhere else.
Yeah, it's in Parshat Vishalach, not Vishalach, excuse me,
Shalach.
Shalach, yeah, which comes up in Sefer B'Midbar, and the Torah tells us that yes, he goes to Hebron. Doesn't go to Shem, he goes to Hebron.
Sorry, my mistake. Sorry.
Vayalu ba'negev vayavo ad Hebron.
I'm sorry about that.
You don't have to be sorry, but if it happens again, I'm going to kick you out of the Zoom room. I just want you to know that.
And you love that.
So I did, before we go, I want to go back to the question, your homework question, Malach and Malach. So we always speak of Malach as an angel. An angel is a representative of Hashem, correct? That's what a Malach does. A Malach does the Hashem's bidding. Malacha is work, but as you know, within the category of Shabbat, it's not any work. It's not labor work. It's creative work. So it's the type of work that would be associated with the Creator. So the work that is associated with the Creator is that which is forbidden to us on Shabbat, because on Shabbat, we're being told we should not be acting in the fashion of creators. We need to recognize that we are creations. So if a malach is the messenger of God, malacha is the work of God. The malacha is the work that God's messengers do. So we do our malachim. We're God's messengers in this world. And the things that we do, the creative work that we do in whatever domain we're working, should be things that bring glory to Hashem. Well, when it comes to Shabbat, the malacha that we are forbidden to do the creative work which best describes sort of the divine domain. And when it comes to Shabbat, we don't act as creators. We recognize that we are creations. And so Kenny is writing, why do you think it's against our religion for a man to have relations with sisters? Oh, Kenny, that's quite a question at the end of the year. Thank you very much, Kenny. Wow.
If you read the whole thing.
Obligation for women to be with brothers. I'm not sure I get that last part.
So they reference if your husband dies, you're supposed to marry his brother, but it's against the religion for a man to be with two sisters.
So two sisters, first of all, that is a biblical commandment in that happens. The question is raised why Yaakov was allowed to do it. One of the answers, typical answers, is that Yaakov did that when he wasn't living in the Holy Land of Israel.
I'm parking that. I'm talking about how it does say it is a prohibition for a man to have relations with sisters.
Correct. So remember what you're talking about is called yibum. If a man has a brother and his brother's wife is survived, his brother dies, has no children, then the man, according to the Torah law, is asked or is allowed to marry his brother's widow for the purposes of maintaining, as it were, the family, his brother's name. Doesn't necessarily mean sisters. There are complications if he's married to his. Should he be able to marry two sisters? And that, in fact, is an issue. He can't marry two sisters, and chalitza would be the proper response to that. He wouldn't be marrying his brother's wife if his brother's wife is his wife's sister.
I'm just, I guess, juxtaposing that in one case it's a prohibition, in another case, from a different gender, it's an obligation. It's just.
But it's different gender, and that change in gender makes a lot of difference.
I guess
that
so.
makes a lot of difference because in the Torah law, a man was allowed to have more than one wife. That's not the case when it comes to who those wives could be. They could not be sisters to each other. That's not allowed. That was not.
I gotcha. I just
Rabbi, I have a question.
Is that Simcha? There he is. Hi,
Yes.
Simcha. Go ahead.
I know of situations where people survive concentration camps and they didn't know if the wife or the husband were alive. And I was trying always to look for the basis of the argument that you wait a certain time, but at some point you have to assume that they are not alive. So they marry again, and suddenly, after a few years, they find that the person was not there. And I was trying to talk about this situation years ago, and I was waiting to see if there was an halachaic or an argument in the Torah that will say, yes, you wait a certain time and you didn't do any violation. Would it be based on this Parsha?
Not so much in this Parsha. Not really.
Not on that much. Okay,
No. But it is true that in the Holocaust, and not just the Holocaust, but there are a lot of situations where the Chachamim had to deal with these questions. And sometimes in the Holocaust, it was considered sufficient for somebody to say your husband or wife was on the transport that went to Auschwitz. And the assumption was that anybody who ended up in the camp would have been murdered. And so even if you did not have an eyewitness who could actually see this person go into the gas chamber and plus v'shalom, sometimes based on other factors, the Rabbanim would allow the remaining spouse to say or to believe to get remarried based on that testimony, because
to take a more tragic, just a tragic but a more recent example. There were a lot of cases like that here in New York on 9/11.
9/11, yeah, absolutely. 9/11
Yes,
brought up a lot of those because unfortunately they didn't find the bodies of the people inside. So let's not end on a sad note. Let's end on the note that Hanukkah Sunday night. I want to wish each of you a freilich and Hanukkah, a Hanukkah filled with light, a Hanukkah filled with hope, a Hanukkah filled with it, as Rabboni Shalom did miracles, Sha'asa Nisim Lavotenu Bayamim miracles for us in our lifetime, and we may be meriting Mirza Hashem to see the greatest rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash with the coming of the Mashiach, and may all of us be worthy and merit seeing that in Rabbi Amenu. Please remember, we won't be meeting now for 3 weeks. Next coming week, we have Hanukkah, 2 weeks post that. Some of you are going on trips. I wish each of you a safe trip and enjoyable trip. Please be well, and I look forward to seeing everybody when you come back. All the best, everybody.
Shana Tova.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Hanukkah Sameach. Pray
Chag
with us.
Sameach.
Hanukkah Sameach.